So this one was from homework number 5, which was on the increasing and decreasing, and we had a little bit of trig in there with it. So let me get to a pen here. We know when we do increasing or decreasing, then we know that that means we got to do the first derivative. And before I even start taking a derivative, I notice I have a chain rule. So I'm going to have a u, which is going to be 3 halves x, which means that u prime equals 3 halves. And then f is going to equal cosine of u, which means f prime is going to be negative sine of u. That's an n, and this is an n, and this is a u. I just made it way worse. All right, so h prime of x equals the derivative of the inside function times the derivative of the outside function, which would be negative sine, and then I'm going to put my u back in of 3 halves x. So there's my derivative. I now need to set my derivative equal to 0. This would also get boxed as my most simplified derivative for when I do my sign chart. Okay, so to undo this, I'm going to take this negative 3 halves to the other side. When I multiply it by negative 2/3, the reciprocal, times 0, I get 0. So I'm looking for where the sine of 3 halves x equals 0. So I'm going to go back to my unit circle, okay? I am looking for every radian measure where the y value is equal to 0. So these two radian measures, meaning the radian measure here is 0. The radian measure on this side is pi. The radian measure over here, again, is 2 pi. So there are 3 places where I have this happening. So I've got to set 3 halves x equal to 0. 3 halves x equal to pi, and 3 halves x equal to 2 pi, because I have to cover every single number on that entire interval. All right, so we're going to multiply 2/3 by 0, and I get 0. So x equals 0. That's one of the endpoints. Okay. I'm going to multiply this on the other side, so I get, by the reciprocal, I get 2/3 pi, or 2 pi over 3. And then here, we're going to multiply that. We'd get x equals, when I multiply by 2/3, I would get 4 pi over 3. So those are my 3 critical numbers. Okay, I'm going to do some erasing here because I just don't have, I did not want to erase my derivative, though. I'm going to have to put that back. Okay. All right, so let me rewrite my derivative, which was negative 3 halves sine of x. Okay, let me box that again because that's important that we know that information. Okay, so now we're going to do our sine. From my interval starts at 0, and it is going to go to, I erased way too much, didn't I? We had 0 was one of them. And then we had 2 pi over 3 was another one. So 2 pi over 3 was my next one. Then we're going to go 2 pi over 3 to 4 pi over 3. So, and then 4 pi over 3 all the way to 2 pi. And I'm sorry, there's some extra scribbles there. So those are my intervals. I got to pick an x value. I got to figure out what's going on with the derivative, and then I got to know what's going on with f. All right, so this is where the be stupid, not crazy comes in. And you have to be able to write this out really super fast to pick something. I'm not going to write them all out. I know that this starts with 0 and it ends with pi over 2, and then it's an x. And then the next one would be 2 pi over 3. And there's an x up at the top, and this is pi. And it goes down to 3 pi over 2. And then there's an x. And the next one would be 5 pi over 3, I believe. And there's an x up at the top. Okay, so if I'm looking at the be stupid, not crazy thing, a number between 0 and 2 pi over 3 would be anything in here, okay? So I'm going to pick pi over 6, because I know pi over 6 is going to be one of those numbers that's in there. In there, I know that both of them are positive, so I know that when I can't do that yet. Take that back. Okay, so, but I'm still picking pi over 6. All right, so now I have to plug into this thing. So when I plug into there, I get sine of 3/2 pi over 6. But this really reduces to sine of pi over 4 times this negative 3/2. So sine of pi over 4 would fall in here where we know they're both positive. So if this is positive and this in front is negative, I know it's negative. Derivative is negative. That means that my function is decreasing. All right. Then, and I'm noticing the answer that was typed here. Your interval was forced to start at 0 and end to 2 pi. Okay. All right, let me do some erasing. So I'm going to erase this guy here. Okay. Not worried about be stupid, not crazy right now. Okay, so I need to pick another number that is in between 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. So it's going to be somewhere in this range in here, okay? So pi is in there, so I'm going to use pi, okay? So I'm going to put that in here. So I've got negative 3/2 sine of 3/2 pi, or 3 pi over 2. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is actually in this column here, okay? So in that column there, we know that neither sine nor cosine is positive, which means I've got negative 3/2 times a negative, so negative times a negative is going to be positive, which means that in this interval it is increasing. All right, one more interval. Okay, let me reduce some erasing here. Okay, so last interval that we need to deal with. So I got to pick a number between 4 pi over 3 and 2 pi, okay? So I know it's something in there. I'm going to go ahead and pick 11 pi over 6 because I know that that's the last one on there, right? Before 2 pi. All right, so I'm plugging that in here. Sine of 3 over 2 times 11 pi over 6. So I know 3 goes into 6 twice. Oh, this one's going to get ugly. Which means that I really have sine of 11 pi over 4. That, I'm going to get rid of this stuff at the bottom really quick. Get rid of that. Okay, so that is not on my standard unit circle. I have to figure out the coterminal angle. So remember last year we would subtract 2 pi. So in this case, when we subtract 2 pi, we would use 8 pi over 4. So we have negative 3/2 sine. So this is coterminal to 11 minus 8, which is 3 pi over 4. So it's going to work the same as 3 pi over 4. Well, 3 pi over 4, if I looked at my be stupid, not crazy, is going to be in this column right here, okay, where only the sine is positive. So I know it's a negative 3/2 times a positive sine of 3 pi over 4. And a negative times a positive is negative, which means it is decreasing. I'm going to let you go ahead and pick your intervals from there.